Chapter 29 implies two main things about the Jojolands. There was a magnetic pole shift in Hawaii's past, and there's maybe a giant spider living underneath Hualalai. At least until more details come to light in later chapters, those seem to be the best explanations for the lava rocks, although it takes some work to get to those answers from what we're shown, so at first, they do sound a bit out there. But there's the guide in Letrado's diary that explains the process for making lava rocks if you can decrypt it. And if we try to translate the guide line by considering what Letrado's thought process behind it could have been, what actual phenomenon he could have been describing or even misinterpreting, and what point the story is trying to make with whatever that mechanism is, the two answers that would explain the lava rocks and tie everything in the Jojolands together are that a long time ago, symbolic magnetic poles on the island of Hawaii swapped charges, and that there's currently something like a spider at Hualalai. I want to try to figure out how exactly the lava rocks work in JoJo's, because this is a setting that resembles the real world with very specific supernatural elements. So even if the lava rocks are a new type of supernatural occurrence we're seeing, there should be a reason that they're a specific phenomenon in the same world as the Devil's Palms and rock humans, that otherwise matches our geography, history, sciences, and cultures. Because it's in the same continuity, even if it adds new elements, the Jojolands should work with the same rules as Steel Ball Run and Jojolian. And if we want to know whether the lava rocks can be entirely explained as a natural result of how the Steel Ball Run universe works, it might be good to see if we can simplify the power system to its lowest term, the fewest rules that would explain the most of what happens in the entire series by implication, which is the best way to find the most organic explanation any power system works through, unless you can read that author's mind. Personally, I think the original continuity and the new continuity have the same core rules, where their universes don't have different fundamental laws, and any difference in power systems is directly tied to the difference in world history. But, to summarize an earlier video, so far, everything supernatural in JoJo's has lined up with the one simple potential rule that anything supernatural comes from the most fitting way to symbolize a natural form of influence that also exists somewhere in the world. Like the universe has a big intelligent mirror built into it that reflects everything of influence back onto the world in a weird magic form. The food chain, which provides living beings with life, becomes magic lightning powers living beings can learn to harness. And the potential anyone has to make endless emergent behavior from the limited things they possess becomes an ability anyone can learn that adds rotational power to possessions on command. People with individually strong influences get their own individualized powers, called stands, and species that have advantages over others develop to have supernatural traits that lock those advantages in. For story's sake, the Pillarmen seemed to be stand-ins for people who do or claim something first so they can establish a hierarchy that gives them unchallengeable power over everyone else, because a big theme in Battle Tendency is inheritance. The villains inherit status and power, which is shown to be dangerous to allow because it means they're taught from birth to never give up their position in a hierarchy, and that the advantages let them live peacefully and freely without having to consider the well-being of individual victims. So, if they're born with even more talent and ambition than the rest of their clan, they have the self-centered values and the unchecked freedom to turn against the rest of their unprepared people and seek even greater advantages, which is what Cars does. Because inheriting a power of exclusivity, like the advantage of a hierarchy, allows self-centered people to develop, who are free to seek out even more power over nature without ever having developed any concern for anything else, and recklessly threaten to destroy the whole environment. And to contrast that, we follow two people descended from virtuous families who pass on values of harmony and altruism rather than personal fortunes, along with a guy who struck it rich, but instead of passing it on to his descendants and making them a clan that's permanently sort of a class above everyone else, does the opposite, not having any children himself and spending his fortune to permanently benefit humanity with the Speedwagon Foundation, and a teacher who only embraces the noble benefits of the hamon expertise she's inherited, and not the selfishness of the previous hamon leader. Also, for story's sake, hamon used by humans in this part represents the solidarity that would unify an actual collaborative community, whereas the hamon Kars gets represents pure selfishness, because he's making himself his own son, which has a double meaning tying into the idea of inheritance. Jojo loves using English double meanings for some reason. So Kars is spawning other living beings from his body just to use for his own ends, and even reabsorb if he's able to. This is the sequel to Phantom Blood, focusing on the descendants and lineages of the first part. So ultimately, the point seems to be that Joseph and Kars inherit two opposing battle tendencies. Joseph inherits a sense of justice that pushes him to fight for good, no matter how much he downplays it, and Kars inherits the status, mentality, and powers of the elites that give him the tendency to turn on everyone else for his own personal gain. And then that leads to a plot where they have to fight. But in universe, the implication is that Pillarmen were able to exist, and Kars was able to use existing traits of his already mystical biology to develop his cutting powers and supernatural gadgets, because the first species at the top of the food chain to develop a way to keep themselves at the top and remove themselves from the chain, like how humans invented agriculture, would have simultaneously developed supernatural traits as part of their physiology. Jojo's mirror mechanic would have allowed a species that got ahead of humans and detached from the food chain to naturally evolve into something supernatural, because symbolically, they're energy sinks that never let the life force they consume go. So they could innately benefit from long lifespans, natural intelligence, and an unstoppable life consumption at the expense of everything else. And because hierarchy comes from isolation and exclusivity, they would have the instinct to keep their populations small. As a result of them already being there, humans never reach the top for inventing agriculture, so humankind never becomes an innately mystical species with energy-draining abilities, allowing human history to still play out like ours. But it's not as if the species the Pillarmen come from would be better in every way. Being an energy sink would also make them vulnerable to the concentrated power of the energy system they're draining, which in this case is the food chain, because they'd be making themselves more sensitive to the energy to pull it in from others in ways those other things can't. And since they'd never tried to let that energy go, while most people's bodies would diffuse intense waves of life energy and let them pass through, the body of a Pillarman would pull that energy in, directly exposing their vitality to it. The strength granted to Pillarmen by the universe is meant to make them good at winning against others, rather than a talent to do something on their own that's useful to the world overall, which means their power is founded on having people to be beneath them. So while they might be stronger than other pieces within this system, their power is at the mercy of it existing. So the system itself, which in this case is the energy of the sun the whole food chain extends from, becomes a weakness. And even when Kars amplifies the traits his species are born with, he still needs to hibernate, because being awake is a trait that species have developed to concentrate their energy to use in a specific burst for the advantage. So Kars becoming a Pillarman just makes his sleep cycle even longer. And it's a way to show his true colors, because he's never in solidarity with anyone beneath him. So instead of being equally vulnerable as other species when he's resting, he hardens and shuts people out by turning into a stone that has a one-way life-draining response to anything that touches it, and becomes an actual pillar new societies eventually form on top of. He's cemented hierarchically above but physically underneath them, doing nothing, but any unsuspecting human who runs into him gets eaten up without a chance to save themselves, until he wakes up and has the freedom to eat everyone else on any scale he wants. His species believed in giving absolute power to the highest class of being, the most advantaged clan. So they were regulating their own feeding themselves and willing to keep creatures lower than them at their mercy. But that made them a platform for an exception like Kars to be born, who was above them and didn't have to regulate himself because hierarchies like the food chain are narrower the closer you get to the top, and the only person on his level was himself. So Kars eventually came along, getting light powers founded on cutting powers, because he outshined the rest of his self-centered, division-based species, and being the individual at the very top of the pyramid, he lacked even the small sense of moderation the people on the level of his species had out of concern for each other. So any beneficial relationships he formed with underlings were still all out of convenience for him, rather than genuine connections. And once he became elite enough to not even need to consume other living beings anymore, he still tried to eat everyone just because he preferred to and didn't have to worry about what they would say. And all of this could be explained as the natural result of a species dominating the food chain in a world where influence is given an echo.